Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Today, I am joined by the beautiful Mel, the host of My Killer Podcast. How you doing today, Mel?
I am doing wonderful. I'm super excited, and I'm happy to be sharing a screen with you finally.
No, this means a lot. We've been trying to link up for a while, and I'm glad we were finally able to make this happen. A little bit about Mel for you guys. You can find her on all social medias, YouTube, Instagram, Letterboxd, Twitter, TikTok, Patreon. And the cool thing about it is you don't have to go searching for them because those links are right down here in the description. So make sure you're clicking those and giving her a follow and subscribing when possible. And while we're talking about subscribing, let's talk about My Killer Podcast for a minute. You can listen to it on all major podcasting platforms, mostly focusing on the horror genre in the categories of physical media, new, old, movie reviews, books and toy merchandise. But she really specializes in B cheese of horror with a flair for the so bad that it's good. So for the people that haven't listened to your podcast yet, Mel, what can you tell us a little bit about it that I haven't touched on yet?
Well, you've actually done a very good job. I tend to, I fall in love with cheesy B horror movies, and that came from my momster for sure. So those are the movies that I tend to gravitate towards. So I just wanted to start a podcast. I was actually very inspired by the movie Pump Up the Volume. Have you seen that? It's actually not a horror movie.
That movie introduced me to punk rock. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, The Descendants in that movie. Like, totally, that movie, total punk rock movie. Christian Slater. I'm so glad you brought that up. That's a phenomenal movie. That's the first movie I remember crying at when the kid kills himself and they find out about it at school the next day. And he's like, I'm so sorry, Malcolm. When he's on the airways talking to Malcolm, like, I remember being a little kid, like, feeling that frog in my throat. Like, what the hell's going on here? I feel sad. Great call. What a fantastic, again, not horror, but what a
no, it's not horror.
Movie.
That movie is so rad, and it used to inspire me when I was a kid. I used to write a lot, I guess, and because I didn't have this kind of way of doing what he was doing in that movie, and it really inspired me, and that's kind of what made me start the podcast in the first place. Just seeing that movie over the years and wanting to do that kind of thing, and then, horror movies are kind of my jam, so I just started there, and away the podcast went. So it really just started as a podcast on like the podcasting platforms, and I would video record them. And then I was like, well, I wonder what would happen if I dropped these on YouTube. So I started dropping my podcasts on YouTube. They didn't do very well. Nobody wants to sit and watch like a 2-hour long podcast of me sitting there talking in a microphone, but that's where YouTube started becoming so much fun, and I started doing these other things, and that's kind of how it became everywhere.
Sure. And that's, man, now I'm going to be thinking talk hard for the rest of the day, man. Like, I'm serious. Like, I love that movie so much. Like, and you're right. Like, I remember being a little kid, and like, because of that movie, this is God's honest truth. I swear on my mother's ashes, this is the God's honest truth. I would sit in my bedroom and I would record like I was a radio DJ on a cassette tape and my little cassette player. And then I would play like a CD on it, and I'd record it like I was a radio DJ introducing the music and shit. And like that's was so really awesome. My first like jump into podcasting was at a young age doing stuff like that. And that's all because of Pump Up the Volume. Like, no, I'm not saying this just because we're doing this together. I'm that serious. Pump Up the Volume inspired me so much because it showed that this guy with no backbone really in life could be larger than life when he's over the airwaves. Like, it's such a fan. If you guys haven't seen it, I know this is a horror channel. I can't recommend Pump Up the Volume enough. Like,
I do the same thing on my YouTube channel. I like try and push that movie out. I'm like, you guys got to see this. I know it's not horror and it's super old and whatever, but it is so inspiring and it's so great. And Christian Slater does an amazing job in it too. It's because he's kind of like this nobody, but then when he's alone and he's able to do his radio thing, he is like everybody. It's amazing.
Happy Harry Hard-On.
Happy Harry Hard-On, yeah. I think that might have even been the movie that got me into writing poetry when I was a kid. I don't do that anymore, but I thought I was a poet when I was a kid too.
Well, whenever he gets the letters from the girl, and like the most sensual, romantic letters, like, oh, what if I'm gonna watch that movie tonight? I have it downstairs.
I was just gonna say, right after this, I'm gonna go throw that movie on.
I'm going to watch it as I'm editing this episode because that's such a fantastic movie. And I'm so glad you brought that back into my bloodstream because I could not watch that movie enough.
I know, it's so great.
It really is. So we're going to get off and pump up the volume here for a minute. I do want to remind everybody, all of Mel's social media links are down here in the description, as well as the podcast. So please keep an eye out for that. Please subscribe to that. And by the time this is aired, Mel may have already been a guest on our live. We're going to have Mel as a guest on one of our top 10 ranking videos here in the future. So if it hasn't happened already by the time this aired, it will be happening. So make sure you're subscribing to her stuff because I wouldn't bring her on. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think she was super fucking rad. So, but before we can get to the future, Mel, we got to go back to the past. And I want to talk about how horror started for you, my friend. Your first horror movie, and Mel, your first horror movie was?
Deadly Friend. At least I think so.
A very underrated Wes Craven classic.
For sure. Absolutely. I had to call my mom and call my dad and be like, what was my first horror movie? Because my mom was the horror movie buff and she just used to watch them all the time. And it wasn't like she was feeding horror movies to us or anything, because I have a brother too. She was just watching them because that's what she loved to do. And if we were in the room and they were on, we could watch them. Or if we wanted to watch something else, we had to leave the room because that's what she was going to do. And she
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I turned out fine. I don't know.
Well, I just feel like I've said this on the podcast before. I feel like if you introduce children to horror at a young age and you have the education to go along with it, the education of this isn't real. If you can ground kids in reality about what's real and what's not, I feel like the kids, at least, and again, I'm no psychiatrist, guys. I know about as much about psychiatry as you do from watching Good Will Hunting. I don't fucking know any better. This is just my opinion. I just feel like the kids like us that were raised on horror and grounded in reality, we are more grounded. We know the difference between fantasy and reality. We know the difference between right and wrong because we were educated about it while watching it at a young age. So that's just my Sledgehammer 2 cents right there when it comes to kids watching horror movies. As long as you educate them on what they're watching, and just like anything else, it all comes with education. You can have the most bright person be fucking stupid about certain things because of the education level that they didn't have. So as long as you're educating your kids on what they're watching and you don't force them to watch it when they're screaming and crying and scared. I have a 9-year-old with high functioning autism. Child's Play is it. She'll watch all the Child's Play movies. We started watching The Purge and she was like, nope. Fuck this, I'm out. That's fine, baby. You know, you don't have to like this stuff, but if your kids are into it, don't think you're a bad parent or your kids are fucking weird. Your kids are fucking rad. Just educate them the differences between right and wrong, yes and no, fantasy and reality, and they will be just fine. They're going to grow up even stronger and smarter because they know the difference. They're not going to blame video games on mass shootings. Like, they're going to be smarter than that, guys. So there's nothing wrong with you as a parent for letting kids watch horror movies, and there's definitely nothing wrong with your kids for being interested in horror. Sorry to go off on that tangent, Mel, but I hate when people think that because somebody watched horror at a young age that they're evil or their parents are bad. Like, that's not it, man. Like, it's a movie. You know, like, I was watching WWF wrestling when I was 3. I didn't go around punching everybody in the face. My parents told me this is WWF. This is on TV. You don't really do this to people. I got educated. I didn't go around giving people Stone Cold Stunners. Like, as rad
I was
as
just going to say, if I saw a little kid give another little kid like the Bone Breaker, I'd be like, what? That's kind of cool.
Oh, yeah,
go all Rowdy Piper on their asses. I'd be like, man, I can't help but cheer right now. Yes. Which is terrible. You shouldn't do that.
The worst thing I ever did because of WWF wrestling, I'll never forget, I got kicked off my school bus because I got off the bus and I turned around and did the BAM, the DX thing. And I totally got kicked off my bus for a week. That wasn't fun. I'm sorry, Mrs. Rattan. I shouldn't have told you to suck you. That's my fault. I apologize all these years later. But Dangerous Friend. Do you remember how old you were the first time you had seen it?
I actually don't. I imagine it was probably early 90s, if not 1990, when I was probably like 7 or 8, I would assume. I mean, okay, so I probably saw horror movies before that, but I can't remember anything before I was 6 years old. I was too young, or maybe I blacked it out. I don't know. But I don't remember seeing anything prior to this, but my momster also told me that it was one of my favorites because I used to walk around the house and I'd try and do the hand thing and I'd be like, BB. Yes. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I could actually do this. So I was always like, you know, messing it up. And I used to walk around the house doing that apparently. So I was like, all right, Mom, this is probably it then.
That's so
But
cool.
it's
'Cause I don't even
probably
know
a
lot of people
close
that know
second
this
to
movie.
The Lost Boys. And you know what? That's funny because I would ask people throughout my life until now about this movie, and nobody ever knew what it was. My brother was the only other person that ever had seen it before. So I just stopped asking people. But then Scream Factory, I brought this over because I'm a nerd, but Scream Factory came out with this guy. So then now everybody's talking about it. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing that people are actually talking about this movie. So, thank you, Scream Factory, for doing that, I guess.
Well, see, and that's how I feel about House. Like for me, House was my first horror movie, and growing up where I'm from, like nobody had ever heard of it. Like, and then now now that I'm in this community, I start learning all the other people that really love and appreciate this movie. And I'm like, yes, like this is what introduced me to horror, like, and it's so awesome to hear that you're finally starting to get that comeback on Deadly Friends. So you could talk about how much of an impact it had on you as a young lady. Like, that's so fucking cool. And another cool thing about this is the main antagonist robot is a female. So you didn't have a lot of that, so for you to be a young lady watching this other lady kicking ass and taking names had to be pretty fucking cool too. So
that was pretty rad.
As a young lady that was watching this, what would you say the scene that affected you the most was?
Well, I was thinking about that because it wasn't until my most recent rewatch of it, in preparation for this, that I actually came to a realization of something that is so incredibly surprising. So I have had this reoccurring nightmare almost my entire life about I'm at my parents' house. It's like this old 100-year-old house. So they have the big black registers in the floor where the heat comes up through, and they had a wood burning stove. And I had this dream that I'd go downstairs in the middle of the night and nobody was there. And I'd hear whispers coming up through that register. So I'd put my ear to it, and then I'd go outside because you had to get to the basement from outside. It was like one of those big wrought iron open cellar doors. And I'd go downstairs, and the wood burning stove would be shooting flames out of it, and there would my family be like hanging from like the ceiling, and that was my nightmare. And then I never put this together until rewatching this. There's a scene in this movie where she goes in the basement and murders her father, and it is pretty much exactly my dream. He looks at the register on the floor, goes down in the basement, and there she is, and she kills him, and like against the stove, the furnace. So clearly that was the scene. That scene did it to me. I don't have that dream anymore. It kind of quit when I was in like high school or whatever, but
that's so rad, man. Not that you were having a terrible dream, but that this movie could influence you that much. Like, that's so cool.
It's kind of freaky to think about it now, because that is the only dream I've ever had that I've had more than once, and I've had it at least a handful of times in my life, and it was terrifying. But I mean, it is a testament that maybe I was a little too young when I saw this movie for the first time.
It ended up working out in the end, because now you're hanging out with me talking about it. So
yeah,
all roads lead to here.
It got me to where I am today.
Right. So we talked about this movie, and this is a movie that, okay, not a lot of people have seen, but it's a very underappreciated Wes Craven classic, in my opinion. What would you say the first thing that pops in your head when you think about this movie is?
The first thing that pops into my head is probably the robot, BB himself, because he's so different looking than any of the robots that you see in any of the other horror movies, because he looks so friendly and he's so nice, and like he's kind of funny. He makes that beep sounds and stuff, which wouldn't that be a completely different horror movie if Christy Swanson was walking around making those noises too?
Right.
Be like a horror comedy then.
Right.
But he's always what I remembered from this movie. But I always remembered him being so friendly and nice. But then, like I said, rewatching it, he was actually violent from the beginning, and he was getting more violent. And Paul, the character Paul in the movie, even references that later. Like, he's noticing him getting a little more violent. So then it makes a lot more sense when he takes that chip and he puts it into Sam, and then she's violent because BB was already kind of going that way, So yeah, I guess that would be it.
Like I said, Well, the movie starts off with the guy looking in the back of the car, and he's like, "Hey, you're kind of cute," and then he gets killed like right away. Like the movie starts
Yeah.
off,
He
right in
gets
your
the
face like
chokehold.
that. So, yes, so rad. Um, but see, and then like this is a movie that there's a lot of fun scenes in this movie too. So, what would you say your favorite scene? We know which one affected you the most, being the basement kill. But what would you
Mhm.
say your favorite scene from this movie is?
Oh, the basketball kill scene. It's it's not only hilarious, it's disgusting. It's unexpected, And yeah, it's just crazy. That scene, it used to scare me, but now it just makes me crack up because I love
Yeah,
to laugh during horror movies for some reason. That's kind of my thing. That's probably why I like the cheesy B horror movies because I like to laugh during horror. And that scene
sure.
is just so over the top ridiculous
Yeah, yeah.
because her head just explodes.
Throw mama from the train, baby.
Yep.
So this is a question I've just recently started incorporating, and this really works here because it hasn't been done yet. Would you like to see this movie remade today?
Oh man. Any other time you ask me that question, I'd be like, hard no. Don't touch my childhood. That's nostalgia for days. But this one, I don't know. I think it could be cool remade, with like more modernized robot and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And I think I remember something about this movie wasn't exactly made the way that the directors and the writers wanted it to be. I think they wrote like a completely different movie. And then somewhere along the line, somebody was like, no, we need to turn this into a horror movie. We need to make it gross. And then, like, every step of the way, they were like, every kill has to be more grotesque than the next one. You know what I mean? So I think it kind of ended up being a completely different movie, which I'm glad it's the movie that it is because
Right.
Wes Craven clearly has his own magical touch on things, but it would be interesting to see this movie remade the way that it was originally thought of. You know what I mean? I don't know. So this would be the only time I'd be like, oh, okay, I guess.
See, I have those moments too. Like, I would never want to see a House remake. I would never want to see what was the one we were Back to the Future. I'd never want to see a Back to the Future remake. Like, don't touch it. Leave it alone. It's perfect the way
Yeah.
it is. If you do it, I'm still gonna watch it. I'll still give you my money. But
Oh,
I
yeah.
would prefer you not remake it.
Yeah. House was actually another one that I used to watch when I was a kid. Um, and one of the movies that I used to watch the most when I was a kid was The Lost Boys, because that one is just a damn classic. That one, I would have said don't remake it. They made a bunch of sequels, which were fine, I guess. I don't know, but that one, I was like, don't touch that one. That one is perfect gold the way that it is.
And now they're doing a Lost Boys remake.
I know, and it's horrible. I wore my Lost Boys shirt because I
I
didn't have
see
a
that.
Deadly Friend shirt. Can you
I
see
can
this? Look at this.
I can hear your shirt right now.
Isn't that? This was one of those impulse
Makes
buys
me
I
want to
was
give up.
flipping through. Right.
I can totally hear
purple
it.
spandex. That would complete my outfit.
Yeah, that's what I need. I need Mel in purple spandex giving me saxophone jive. That's what I
Right?
need in my
Giving you
life.
saxophone, just doing it. I would do it all day. Next time. And that chain around my waist, jingling.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Next time, I got you.
Perfect. So we did talk about your first horror movie, Mel, and what that movie meant to you, being Dangerous Friend. And now, just like always, I got to throw you my curveball here. My friend
Uh-oh.
Ghostface is here, and he's got a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Mel? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
My favorite modern horror movie is *Malignant*. That movie just killed it, and I went into that with I was a little scared. I thought people were overhyping it, so I was going into it thinking, crap, this movie is going to be overhyped. I'm expecting too much. It delivered on every level, and I loved it. But The Lost Boys is probably my all-time favorite movie horror style, but my all-time favorite movie ever is The Burbs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You can almost say that it's a horror comedy, kind of, right? Because there's
It teeters that
death
line.
and the neighbors are weird, and yeah, The Burbs, all-time favorite movie of life. I love it so much. It's so quotable and it's funny. I don't know. I'm not even like an avid Tom Hanks fan, but this movie, like, traveled with me my entire life. I've watched it I've watched the beginning millions of times because when I was younger, I used to put it in right before bed and that'd be the movie I fell asleep to. So I'd seen the beginning like hundreds of thousands of times and the end maybe like 50 times because I'd always fall asleep before we got there.
Right. That's still a great movie though. Like
It's
you said,
so good.
definitely teeters the line, man. But see, I've always been one of those people that horror is what you make it. This movie that's probably scared me the most in my whole life, I won't go into too much detail here, but it's The Truman Show with Jim Carrey. Like, I had a legit nervous breakdown after watching that movie. I thought that was my life, and I thought that people were trying to hint at me that everybody was watching me, and I was like in this bubble. Like, I had a real nervous breakdown. That movie fucked me up really bad. So horror to me is always definitely subjective, and it's what you make of it. Now, before we get off here, Mel, I always ask the same question. I've had such an amazing time with you. I want to go back now to Dangerous Friend. And what we're going to do now is we're going to rank this on a skull count. Now, just like always, we're not being critics. We're not judging it on acting, score, production, nothing like that. We're judging this strictly on how much this movie affected you on first watch. So 0 skulls, not effective. 5 skulls, very effective. And anywhere in the middle, what would your ranking of Dangerous Friend be?
Well, I would have to say, since it gave me a reoccurring nightmare for half my life, probably a 4 or 5. Maybe 5, you know.
I always feel like the first
that
one
dream
is always
used to scare the shit out of me.
Yes. Yep. When it can affect you to that level where it's in your bones, it's got you.
Yeah, and it to the point where I didn't even remember that that's where it came from. You know, because this may have been my first horror movie, but it wasn't readily available for a good chunk of my life because it just came out from Scream Factory. So, like I said, on the rewatch, I was like, what the hell?
So that's where that came from.
Yeah, thanks, monster. I call her my monster because she's the one that got me into horror. So she's a mom and a monster all into one.
She sounds perfect.
But she was also like super religious too, which was weird. So maybe that's where the rationale came in for me. She'd be like, okay, you can watch these horror movies, but you're going to go to hell if you do any of this stuff.
Right. 10 Hail Marys.
Right. I had a very interesting childhood, I feel like.
No, that's awesome. That's so cool. You know, like having your mom still with you is still rad. Mine passed away unexpectedly at 50. So definitely treasure that monster as much as you can because they are fucking unbelievable and awesome. And it sucks when they're gone. So Mel,
for sure.
we are at the third act now. The credits are about to roll. So I want to remind everybody, those social media links aren't going to click themselves, guys. So make sure you are clicking these links. Follow her on social media. Subscribe to the podcast. Stay up to date with her. She's a good friend of mine. I'm so glad we were able to finally make this connection on the channel. We will be working together again in the future. I promise you that. Mel, don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you. Okay. Everybody else, as always, keep talking horror. Stay what you are. And we'll see you guys soon.